The New Yorker magazine is, I think, perhaps best known for its long articles on current affairs, the arts, literary criticism, short stories, and so much more. I recommend it highly. But yet I think many of you may know that the immediate go-to content when the magazine arrives in the mailbox is, of course, the cartoons. But now with the miracle of online technology, you can get all kinds of specialized newsletters from the New Yorker in your email inbox. My favorite has the subject line, Daily Humor from the New Yorker. Now, if you are familiar with their cartoons, they are, of course, good for a laugh, but they also often have a thought-provoking, ironic insight of truth. I love the caption on this cartoon by Ellie Black, if you can see it okay. Quick, it's the 45 minutes a year when tomatoes taste incredible. And doesn't Avi Steinberg's cartoon perfectly capture the times in which we live? Wait, I'm confused. Are we excited to go back to school or not? But one that really speaks to this moment is by cartoonist Lars Kenseth. Would you mind if I change the channel to check on the other disasters? You all heard as Dan read Paul's litany. Afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger. Well, today our litany could go something like this: wildfires, floods, terrorism, tropical storms, hurricanes, global warming, a rampaging virus, earthquake, civil war, a refugee crisis. The first century has nothing, absolutely nothing, on the 21st century. In terms of hardship, natural disasters, and human suffering, it feels as though we could easily be giving Paul's moment in history a run for its money. Back to that cartoon, that caption, would you mind if I change the channel to check on the other disasters, is most definitely a good one, but I think there might be a more common universal gut response to the television headlines. Would you mind if I turn the TV off? How many of us have said that and actually done that to avoid the unrelenting images of human suffering and death? A show of hands. For those of you online, I think virtually almost every hand went up. We all have probably threatened to turn off the television set as the images have begun to haunt us, and we have all probably done that. Completely understandable. And yet, I think we all know deep down in our hearts that is not the most appropriate human response, and certainly not the most appropriate Christian response. Of course, we all occasionally need that mental or emotional break from the world's trials and tribulations, but we also need to choose the course that the Apostle Paul has laid before us. We have commended ourselves in every way through great endurance, by purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and the power of God. The afflictions of our own lives, the hardships of our world often do call upon each of us to show that great endurance and then to respond to those afflictions and hardships with kindness and genuine love. Kindness and genuine love, that is the power of God. We are the power of God. And yet kindness and genuine love are nice, lofty words, but where does the rubber meet the road? Especially when the suffering seems so massive and so beyond the reach of any of us to make any real difference. Well, friends, we can and we have made a difference when disaster strikes. Even now, Hurricane Ida is making landfall on Louisiana. It is 16 years ago today, to the day, that a hurricane by the name of Katrina made landfall on the Gulf Coast. At the time, it was the costliest natural disaster in U.S. history. At the time, some of you may recall, I was president of the board of directors of our United Church of Christ Back Bay Mission in Biloxi, Mississippi. And its executive director, Sherry Pressman, and I had just celebrated the renovation of the mission's administration building. Well, as the storm surge receded, it became clear that 6 of the mission's 7 buildings were completely destroyed. And yes, the administration building would need to be renovated yet again. How could the mission possibly rebuild? Many nonprofits just left Biloxi. How could we possibly continue the important work of reaching out to the poorest of the poor on the Mississippi Gulf Coast? How could we possibly show great endurance through their very real afflictions, hardships, and calamities? Well, as you all know, especially Kate, I love recognizing anniversaries. Well, next month is the 70th anniversary of the release of an award-winning film starring Marlon Brando, Vivian Leigh, Carl Malden, and Kim Hunter. All but Marlon won Oscars for their performances. The film was A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. And the most famous line from that film, that play, I've always depended, thank you, Nancy, always can count on you. I have always depended on the kindness of strangers. I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. I texted with Sherry Pressman this past week, and it is her memory and mine that in the months following Katrina's destruction, United Church of Christ members, churches, friends, and maybe even a few strangers to Back Bay sent close to $750,000 worth of kindness to help us rebuild Back Bay Mission so we could continue our ministry of love to the poorest of the poor. And in a story that I perhaps have told before, to this day I'll never forget the example of kindness to Back Bay Mission that came from one First Church member. It was the week after Katrina, and I was preparing to fly down to Biloxi to meet up with Sherry to assess the damage and to come up with a plan to rebuild the mission. I had a previously scheduled breakfast at Ken's with a committee chairperson who knew I would be making this trip. Like it was yesterday, I remember which booth in Ken's we were in. This individual reached across the table and handed me a check for $5,000 for Back Bay Mission. I would modify Blanche's assertion in that play in this way: the world has always depended on the kindness of strangers. The world has always depended on the kindness of strangers. And a brief survey shows that the centrality of kindness for a well-lived human life is a universal truth for nearly every religion, philosophy, or humanistic credo. The 6th century Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu captured it this way: kindness in words creates confidence, kindness in thinking creates profoundness, kindness in giving creates love. A century later, the Buddha wisely said, Teach this triple truth to all: a generous heart, kind speech, and a life of service and compassion are the things which renew humanity. Fast forward yet another 100 years, and Plato captured it succinctly: always be kind, for everyone is fighting a battle. One final one. Rabbi Harold Kushner said, when you are kind to others, it not only changes you, it changes the world. Well, now that we have hopefully established the importance of kindness for our own well-being and the well-being of the world, I think it is important to conclude these thoughts with this caveat. Kindness is not simply some wishy-washy, nebulous, touchy-feely, nice feelings toward a fellow human being. Kindness must always include concrete, compassionate, and sometimes even self-sacrificing actions to make real those kindly thoughts and feelings. That was the lesson that CBS News correspondent Steve Hartman shared last year with his children Emmett and Merrill during the online series they offered in the first months of homeschooling during the shutdown. His teaching series was called Kindness 101, and over the many weeks the topics included altruism, patriotism, empathy, character, and the lesson most pertinent for us today was his very last, on compassion. Hartman begins the class by asking his cute little daughter, Merrill, what she thought compassion was. Caring for others and helping others, she said. Pretty good answer for a 6-year-old. But of course, Dad, who earns the big bucks with CBS, went a little deeper as he explained to Merrill and his online audience. Compassion is caring for others' feelings and doing what you can to help. Caring for other people's feelings and doing what you can to help. But then Hartman drove the point home when he said, there is a call to action for people who are compassionate. They don't just care about other people's feelings. Compassion calls them into action to do something about it. It is a call to action. Then, in usual Steve Hartman fashion, the class on kindness and compassion is illustrated by 4 touching stories. I'll share just one. Stories about the joy not only for the recipient, but the joy felt by the giver. In 1957, Gil and Grace Caldwell from North Carolina were turned back from the Mount Airy Lodge in the Poconos for their honeymoon, even though they had a documented reservation. Gil then told the story of his involvement in the civil rights movement. There he is next to Martin Luther King. He told his story to a class of 5th graders at the Bear Tavern Elementary School in Titusville, New Jersey. The honeymoon story was not his focal point, but it became the call to action for those deeply moved class of 5th graders. It was just not right, Emily said, the emotion and the pain quite visible on her face. And then she said, and then we knew we had to do something to make it right. And so each of the 5th graders wrote a letter to the new owners of Mount Airy Lodge, and they got Grace and Gil a honeymoon redo 64 years later. Friends, believe me, the images, the scenes of human suffering and injustice constantly staring us in the face, sometimes I personally want to cry out, wouldn't you mind if I turned off the TV? Speaking of turning something off, for those of you out there in live stream land, please stay online through the end of the service. In the benediction, I will offer you some ways that you can make a difference in your life, in the life of others. Friends, our world today, in Haiti, Afghanistan, and we fear in Louisiana, and so many other places of suffering and need in our world, are depending on us. Our world will always depend on the kindness of strangers. I don't know if it's true, but it might be argued that children perhaps instinctively know the importance of being kind. Listen to these words of one of those fifth grade boys at the Titusville Elementary School. When Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell what they faced was terrible, and it was just wrong. Standing up for others, that's what we had to do. Even though we are just kids, we can make a difference in the world, and taking action really made us feel good inside. As Steve Hartman said, feeling compassion must always be a call to action. Here at First Church, we are blessed to have a personal relationship with two agencies addressing what's going on in Haiti and Afghanistan. As many of you know, for over 10 years, we've had a relationship with Hello Haiti, an orphanage in Haiti. We are in touch with them. Elizabeth Kennedy from Middlefield was the founder of that orphanage, and she has spoken here at First Church. The orphanage was damaged. The children are out living under tents, I think the last we heard. IRIS, Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services of New Haven. Chris George is their executive director, as many of you know, member of this congregation. Over 300 people were on a Zoom call with Chris and his staff on Friday. They are gearing up to receive 700 and maybe more Afghan refugees this fall. This is not normal refugee resettlement. This is emergency evacuation. Their need is great. Kate and I sent a blast email out on Monday with the links of, I think, 4 or 5 different ways that you can respond to what's going on in Haiti and Afghanistan. We'll send out another blast this week, probably just with the donation links for Hello Haiti and for IRIS. What they need is money, plain and simple, to do God's work. Whether you give $5 or $500, as that little boy said, you're going to feel a whole lot better inside when you do something to address what's going on in Haiti and Afghanistan and maybe in Louisiana. Guaranteed, we will feel better inside when we respond with action and compassion. And let the people say, Amen.